Ladies and gentlemen, I will, in a moment, we will proceed with the closing argument offered by the defense. Who will offer that closing? It will be me, Your Honor. Mr. Gross will offer that closing. The comment was made, ladies and gentlemen, it's always a pleasure to work with attorneys who are zealous advocates for their respective positions and for their sides. And the comment was made about the defense of self-defense and the manner in which defense counsel is presenting that. I'm instructing you that you should disregard that portion of the solicitor's opening argument. Okay? With that, Mr. Gross, you are acknowledged for your closing at your leisure, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court.
Yes, sir.
Just before I start, I want to just say one thing. Sometimes we apologize for the inconvenience that our criminal justice system causes because of the waiting involved. One of the things that we never apologize for and never will apologize for is the importance of what we do here in this courtroom. It's the only country in the world where the citizens are selected, ordinary, everyday people from the community, just like the people who come in here and face criminal charges to make decisions. And that's an awesome responsibility. I know you didn't ask for it, but we appreciate everything that you all have done to pay attention this week and be attentive to everything that has been talked about. I think it's probably appropriate for me to start where my colleague Bill McGuire started on Monday afternoon. He talked about three things, and at some point in this argument, I'm going to hit all three of those things. One of the things that he said was that there were matters that both sides agreed on, but there was matters that we didn't agree on. And he told you that in their opening statement, they had only presented part of the story, part of the evidence, part of the picture of what happened on that night 5 years ago. And that we were going to try to present the rest of that story this week. And I tell you that because one of the things that they have done in their opening argument is picked and choose. They have picked and choose parts of the law, and they have picked and choose parts of the facts. When the judge instructs you on the law, he is not only going to tell you that you should consider everything that he charges as a whole. He is going to give you jurors a copy of that instruction. And if you want more copies, if everybody wants to have a copy in the jury room, you all can ask for that. The second thing that's important is that they again picked and choose on parts of the facts. And we'll talk about that more in just a minute. The second thing Mr. McGuire told you about is that you were going to hear from Rico Kinsborough and Chris Brown that their intention that night was to get him, shoot him, and kill him. They were going to get Benny, they were going to shoot him, they were going to kill him. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute, but that turned into not only are we going to get him, not only going to shoot him, we're going to kill him, but when we can't do that, we're going to kill one of his family members. That's the evidence that has been presented in this courtroom. And when we get to talking about what happened at Benny's house, we're going to talk about that. But before I get into that, I need to address one other thing that Mr. McGuire talked with you about on Monday. And he told you that based on the emotions involved, that we were going to ask that you find Benny guilty of voluntary manslaughter instead of murder. Well, I'm here to tell you that Judge Addy has made a decision that the only verdict that you're going to get to consider regarding Nicole Kinsborough is murder. And we understand the implications of that. Benny Brown understands the implications of that. We know that you will return a verdict based on that decision that the judge made, that Benny is guilty of murder and that he's guilty of possession of a firearm during the commission of a violent crime. We accept Judge Addy's ruling because we accept the rule of law. Benny made a mistake, and you heard on one of the tapes, I think it was the 911 call, that he knew that he had messed up. In fact, as horrible as it was, and as sad as it is that the children are orphans, essentially, and that it's left a hole in the lives of Ms. Minnie Mae and those kids, Benny did accept responsibility from the beginning. He called his family members. He told them what he had done. He was in a depressed state. He did show remorse. You can show remorse for committing a horrible action. And he did make his way back to his home, which I would refer to as a temporary place of safety. And why that's important is that there is a break in the chain of events from the tragedy that happened in Fountain Inn to what happened in Benny's front yard. Benny had withdrawn from the situation. He knew the character of his family. He saw them come in and testify. He knew that they would call the police and report what he'd done. He had gone to his house. And when this chain of events was broken, when he got to the temporary place of safety where he was ultimately going to be arrested, when he got to that place, there was this whole other chain of events that had started. Rico Kinsborough, Chris Brown, and we don't know how many other people had a meeting where they decided, we're going to get him, we're going to shoot him, we're going to kill him. I imagine you're going to hear from the other side a lot of trying to explain why you should put credibility into what Rico Kinsborough and Chris Brown said in this courtroom. They turned over the gun, one gun. You heard from Lieutenant Blackman and other people about the evidence of the number of guns that were out there. And they're going to say, well, why would they give them one and why would they not give them the other? The answer's right here in Defense Exhibit 51, markers 34 and 35, and the gun that was introduced into evidence. That was the gun that didn't work. We know that they were using that to try to kill Benny. We know it for several reasons. They said that's what they were going to do. Rico told you, almost bragged, that he wanted to be the trigger man. He told you that but for the gun not working, Benny would be dead. He told you that if he hadn't gone there, or he had left after he snuck up to the window, Roger Rice would be alive today. This is a whole new chain of events. And why is this important? You were out there yesterday, you had a time to walk around. They talked about sneaking up to the house, to the bedroom, and hearing Benny cry. They're talking about brick walls. They're probably going to get up here and tell you that those brick walls mean that Benny couldn't hear what Rico Kinsborough and Chris Brown were doing in the front yard. But if Rico could hear Benny crying, don't you think Benny could hear them yelling? It's common sense. It makes sense. They told you they snuck up there. They told you that these windows were too high to shoot in. What did they do? They came back here, 34 and 35, clear shot into that bedroom where they heard Benny crying. And what did they do? The gun didn't disintegrate like they tried to say. It misfired. SLED firearms examiner told you that there was a mark on the head of one of those bullets that indicated that they had tried to fire. They racked the clip again, falls out. There was at least 2 shots that were attempted at that point into Benny's house. Were they just trying to kill him then, or were they trying to flush him out the front door, or both? Probably. Why would they turn over that gun and not the other gun? As fast as these SLED officers had testified, the 2 yesterday, well, the 3 yesterday, how fast they responded to the scene and how fast they began examining the evidence within a day or two, the results weren't back. When Ben Quan McGee came forward and said he saw Rico and Chris with guns, putting them in the burgundy car that carried the evidence away from the crime scene, the crime that was being committed by Rico and Chris Brown, you've got to think that as that unfolded, when you're out here in the front yard and Rico has come back and we're not sure who has the gun, when they have the gun, they're both passing the gun back and forth. Chris is talking about that he's going to get Ben Quan too. Goes from going to get him, we're going to shoot him, we're going to kill him, to we're going to get, shoot, and kill one of Benny's family members. And this confrontation is going on over here in the front of the house near where marker 28 is, where Deputy Rice's body cam fell to the ground. And there's this shootout, and Ben Quan was in danger. They've got to be wondering, is the bullets that they're going to recover from Deputy Roger Rice and Benny Brown, did it come from the gun that worked? And that wasn't known when they were asked to turn over the gun. That wasn't known when they carried the guns away in the burgundy car, a different car than they arrived in. That wasn't known when they were being interviewed within 6 hours and they got a free pass on the gunshot residue test, even though the information was available. You got to think. One of the definitions of reasonable doubt that the judge is going to say, listen to it all, but are there questions? Is there something that causes you to hesitate to ask? Hesitate to ask. Are there questions that keep you from being firmly convinced about somebody's guilt? And this is important because we know why Rico Kinsborough and Chris Brown and possibly other family members were there that night. We know that because they told you that. So when they come back up here, don't let them ask you to disregard that. They also picked and choose in their opening statements or opening argument here today about the law, about self-defense. They just wanted to focus in on not being at fault and bringing on the difficulties. And I've already touched on the break in the chain of events from what happened in Fountain Inn to when Rico and Chris got involved with their guns to get Benny, to shoot Benny, to kill Benny. What the judge is going to tell you, and you can read it when you get the copy back in the jury room, is that the state has to disprove all the elements of self-defense. And you're also going to hear that part of the law in our country is the right to defend others. And that's an important part of this case. Because self-defense that night not only applied to Benny Brown, it also applied to Ben Quan McGee. Ben Quan had the right to defend himself. And the law is, you can either act on appearances or you can act when yourself or your family member is in actual danger. And there can be no doubt from what Rico Kinsborough and Chris Brown said from this witness stand that not only was Benny in actual danger because they were going to kill him, but that when that confrontation was going on in the front yard and they were passing the guns back and forth, and Chris was saying, "I'm going to whip you too," or whatever it was, and Rico was rushing towards Ben Quan, make no mistake about it, Ben Quan McGee was in actual danger, and regardless of the horrible crime that Benny committed in Fountain Inn, Ben Quan was not involved in that. Ben Quan was somebody who had come to this house, was a relative who grew up with knowing Benny, grew up around Benny's children. He had a right to be there, and he did absolutely nothing to Rico Kinsborough or Chris Brown to cause them to go after Ben Quan. Not a thing. And they're probably going to get up here and try to get you to disregard the fact that there's a lot of evidence of additional gunshots. Ben Quan heard them, and he went to go see what was going on. May not have been the smartest thing to do. I bet he wouldn't do it again, knowing what happened out there that night. But in the moment, and with the concerns they had about Benny, you could see why they would do that. Benny's grandmother told you that. But if you want to set that aside, and I don't think you can set that aside because that's part of what happened, there were two neighbors that heard it. Hannah Price came in here and testified. She was the next door neighbor. One of the photographs at the end of Annie Lane, you see her house. And she told you several things that were really important. She heard a first cluster that was separated by as much as 30 seconds. It was enough time for her to wake up her boyfriend, who's now her husband. And it was enough time for them to say, "Did you hear shooting?" "No, I don't think anybody's shooting." Then they heard more gunshots, which fits with the scenario that Ben Quan told you about, that Benny's grandmother told you about. Lieutenant Blackman also talked about the statement that they got from one of the other neighbors. The neighbor didn't testify, but he testified about the statement. The statement that he got from the other neighbor was that people were driving down and somebody turned around and they heard somebody fire at the house like a drive-by shooting. Was he mistaken that it was a drive-by shooting and he just saw the car drove by and then he heard the shots that were fired in the yard? Or is there even another gun out there? We don't know, because we don't know how many people were there at guns that night. We know a lot about what happened. We will never know everything. But use your common sense. When Chris Brown and Rico Kinsborough conspired to murder Benny, do you think they're going to go there with one gun? Is that how two thugs roll? Two thugs don't roll with one gun. They had at least two guns. And they may have had other family members there to back them up. Because we have no idea, even the identities of everybody who was in that yard that night. The other thing that Hannah Price told you that was real important, and it also fits with Officer Prather's car video in two ways. I just talked about the fact that she heard as much as a 30-second break between the shots. You'll recall in Officer Prather's video, it was approximately 38 seconds into the video when the gunshots started, where the police were returning fire. Well, if you back up, his video begins with him coming down Barrel Stave Road. They made a point of talking about things that he passed, and so he was there less than 30 seconds. So Hannah Price hears those shots. Officer Prather and the other officers haven't arrived and haven't gotten out of the car yet. Then Benny is defending Ben Quan and himself, and the police start shooting back. The second thing that Hannah Price told you, that's the point when I saw the lights, the police lights, for the first time. Everybody has said that as soon as the door opened, Benny started shooting. It's because he could hear what Rico and Chris Brown were saying to Ben Quan. He knew that that person he grew up with was in danger. He could hear that there was a crowd of people in his yard. Just like Hannah Price, there was no reason to know that the blue light had gotten there yet. He opens the door, and the first thing he sees, right out in front of his porch, is Ben Quan in danger. And he reacts. And he shoots Rico Kinsberg. Sadly, Roger Rice was in the area where Rico and Chris Brown were. And he was wearing all dark clothing, which I understand is part of the uniform. And we understand that Deputy Rice was there doing his job that night. And I certainly hope that you don't take anything that we have said or done this week to do anything to disparage him or his memory. You heard me ask Marty Crane about knowing him, that he was a good man, a good father, a good police officer, the type of professional that would help Benny Brown, protect Benny Brown from that crowd in his yard, that mob, even though he knew what had happened in Fountain, what Benny had done, the crime Benny had committed in Fountain. And when they brought Lieutenant Blackman back up here yesterday, and I said we had one question that we forgot to ask, I asked him about a statement that he had in his file from an officer that sat with Benny in the hospital in Greenville. You'll remember when they brought Benny out, it was Lieutenant Plexico that told him that a police officer had been shot. They're going to pick and choose certain words that he said in the ambulance. But Benny also said, tell that deputy, I'm sorry I shot him, I didn't mean to. He talks about his in-laws in plural. And again, we don't know how many there that night were there to assist Rico and Chris in their conspiracy to kill him. He didn't realize that an officer, that a deputy had been shot. He said to tell them that they were sorry. And then when another officer was sitting with Benny in the hospital in Greenville, Benny asked, who is the deputy that I shot? The response was, Deputy Rice. His title and his last name. Benny's response was, oh no, Roger Rice. He was a good man. Benny knew Roger Rice's first name. Ben Quan knew Roger Rice and didn't see him out there until after the shooting happened and he'd been shot. Nobody is here to say anything bad about Roger Rice. He was doing his job, and this is a horrible tragedy. But the judge is going to talk to you about the law in South Carolina of transfer intent. And they only put part of it up there because they only want to tell half the story. They don't want you to know the rest. If a person without legal excuse or justification shoots at one individual and inadvertently kills another, he would be guilty of the same degree of unlawful homicide as if he had killed the object of his aim. Therefore, a defendant may be found guilty of murder in a case of bad or mistaken aim under the doctrine of transferred intent. But there's more. If he was acting in self-defense or in the defense of others and accidentally killed another, he would be guilty of no crime. In short, malice or the lack of malice follows the bullet. You'll hear Judge Addy charge that. You'll have a copy. You'll be able to read it for yourself. And I want to close with this thought to kind of talk about transferred intent.
5 minutes, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. I want to close with this one thought, to talk about transferred intent. Because we know from Officer Prather's testimony that Vinny opened the door and he was trained in on one spot where Rico Kinsborough and Chris Brown were. Chris Brown and Rico Kinsborough have come into this court and have admitted to you that they are guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. If they were on trial, if Rico and Chris were on trial in this courtroom this week, your verdict would be a very easy decision based on what they told you they were there to do and intended to do and the crimes that they were guilty of. Thank you, Your Honor. Like I said, your verdict would be very simple if Chris and Rico were on trial. Ben Quan was unarmed, but if Ben Quan had that gun and he was the one that had shot Rico in the leg, and you heard the same testimony from those three, Chris Brown, Rico Kinsborough, and Ben Quan McGee, your verdict would be very simple. Chris and Rico would be guilty. What makes this more difficult on an emotional level is that an innocent person doing his job died. But you took an oath, and we have a great system, and the judge is going to talk to you about transferred intent. And regardless of how they try to misdirect you, Vinny's focus was on protecting Ben Quan, and he's not guilty of it. We know you're going to find him guilty regarding the Colt, and we're going to accept that. But we ask you to do what you swore to do and decide this case based on the evidence and not the emotion, and find Vinny not guilty of the 5 counts of attempted murder and the tragic death of Deputy Roger Rice.